What's amazing about Marx is that today we say he's wrong, right? Communism happened in the Soviet Union, it happened in China, but it happened in Europe and in the United States, where Marx said it would happen first, because Germany was more industrialized than Russia or China, okay? Does that make sense? That's what we say. If you think about it deeply, Marx was right. After World War II, every society, to some extent, adopted the ideals of communism. It doesn't make sense, okay? We call this socialism and not communism, but basically it adhered to the thinking of Marx, which is to make the worker the heart and center of your society. And why did they do that after World War II? Because workers create value. Money doesn't create any value. Money just creates more money. It's speculative. But the workers create value. They're productive. And therefore, you have to treat your workers properly. So in America and in Europe, workers became the heart and center of your society. And the workers, through unions, could demand political reform. And so all of society was geared towards making the lives of the middle class, the working class, better. That's why you had excellent healthcare, great public schools, cheap university. So the 50s and 60s and 70s was basically the peak of society for the working class. But in the 80s, we start to change this. Why? Why would we want to change the system? It's a great system, right? Marx is right. Having the worker as the central organizing unit of society makes a lot more sense than having money as the heart and center. But starting in the 80s, we start to go back to money. Why? So what happened in the 80s is something called the revolt of the elite. In other words, the problem with having a society based on the worker is it becomes too egalitarian, too equal, right? But if you're like the elite, you don't want equality, you want difference. You want to have power and money in your hands. Does it make sense? So the revolt of the elite happened in the 80s. And this is what we call in the United States, Reagan Revolution, the beginning of neoliberalism, free market capitalism. And in Britain, it was called Thatcherism, okay? The Thatcher Revolution. And so now you need to transition away from the worker to something else, another ideology that allows the elite to amass power. So just to show you how radical this revolution was. In the 1970s, okay, 1970s, if you were a CEO, the head of a company, okay, you were making on average $1 million a year. That's pretty good, right? That's really good money. And that $1 million was more than 20 times the worker. And that's pretty reasonable. Today, the average CEO in the United States makes $20 million a year. And that is 200 to 300 times more than the average worker in the company. Okay, does that make sense? So in the 80s, inequality started to explode, right? And so they're transitioning from the worker to a new organizing unit called the consumer.